Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Welcome to our 365 daily devotion. Ngayong umaga ay ating patuloy na pagbubulayan ng ating huling episode o huling paksa sa ating devotion ngayong linggo. At ang paksa natin ay pinamagatang Be at the Center of God's Will. Ang paksa natin ay magmumula sa Genesis 12 verses 1 to 2. Sabi dito Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will shew thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make that name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Ang paksa natin ay may katuruan o may mga teachings, at ang unang paksa natin o unang katuruan is being at the center of God's will doesn't mean having complete knowledge. So when God called Abram to leave his country, he didn't lay out the entire plan or reveal the final destination. God simply said, Go to a land that I will show thee. In other words, Abram didn't know exactly where he was going. He only knew he was to follow God's guidance step by step. So this lack of complete information required Abram to place his full trust in God's character and faithfulness rather than in a roadmap. So similarly, when we are called to be at the center of God's will, it doesn't mean we'll have all the answers. So we may not know every detail of the path ahead, but we can be confident that God knows the way. Trusting God requires us to rely on His wisdom and timing rather than our desire for certainty. So in our journey of faith, God often reveals only enough for us to take the next step, asking us to trust that He will guide us through the unknown. True faith is about moving forward even when we can't see the entire picture. Second is to being at the center of God's will requires faithful obedience. So Abram's response to God's call was one of immediate obedience. Despite not knowing all the details, he trusted God's promise and left behind his old life. So this step of obedience set him on a journey that would eventually lead to the fulfillment of God's promises. So Abram's faith was demonstrated not through words but through action. So by leaving his familiar surroundings and moving towards this land of God had promised. So in our lives, staying at the center of God's will requires us to take similar steps of faithful obedience, even when the path is unclear. Obedience is often challenging because it asks us to let go of control, comfort, and the familiar. Yet it is through obedience that we align ourselves with God's purposes and places ourselves in a position to receive His blessings. So God's will isn't something we simply understand. It's something we live out through daily acts of faith and trust. So like Abram, we're called to walk in obedience, trusting that each step brings us closer to the fulfillment of God's promises. So lastly is to being at the center of God's will leads to the center of God's blessings. So God promised Abram that if he obeyed, he would not only be blessed but would also become a blessing to others. This pattern blessing following obedience reveals an essential truth about God's will. Being at the center of God's will often position us to receive His blessings, not for our sake alone, but we may become conduits of blessing to those around us. So Abram's life shows that God's blessings are often generational, impacting not just the individual but their family, community, and beyond. So when we follow God's will, we open the door for His blessings to flow into our lives and through us to others. So this is not a material wealth or worldly success, but about experiencing the fullness of God's presence, peace, and provision. So God's blessings often come in ways we don't expect. Spiritual growth, meaningful relationships, and a sense of purpose and lasting impact on those we encounter. So by aligning ourselves now with God's will, we position ourselves in the center of His plans, allowing His blessings to flow through us and reach our world in need.